Welcome back. So what precisely is the United States trying to achieve with this landmark meeting between Condoleezza Rice and Colonel Gaddafi? Why now? And at what cost? The US State Department says the meeting's proof that the US doesn't have permanent enemies. And the meeting comes as there's a surge of interest from US energy firms in doing business in Libya. The White House says it intends to work with Libya to counter terrorism in the region, though there are concerns that this will result in a muted criticism of Libya's human rights record and that Washington may not choose to use all of its leverage to pressure Tripoli to clean up its act. We've already talked about some of those points with our guests. Let's go into some in more detail. In Washington, D.C., David Magg, former ambassador, and in Seattle, Dr. Ali Tahouni, economics lecturer, member of the Libyan opposition party. David Magg, you worked in Libya for some time. You presumably had a chance to take a close look at the economics of the country back in those days. And Colonel Gaddafi sort of prevented a lot of people looking in very closely. But had they been able to, they would have seen a country of great mineral wealth, wouldn't they?
Indeed, a country of great wealth and frustrated potential. The fact is that for 15 years at least, Libya went through very, very bad times in which a system was imposed upon the country that didn't really allow the Libyans to develop their economic and social potential. In fact, they went backwards and they became increasingly isolated from the rest of the world. There were a lot of Libyans, like Professor Tahouni, many of the members of the elite who left Libya during that period, went abroad to have greater freedom and greater economic opportunity. And then at some point, there was a shift in Libyan policy. We're not quite certain when that took place, early 90s, late 90s. I've heard various theories about why Qaddafi changed his policy.
Well, give us your idea of why he did, because it was a very, very sudden change after years and years of isolation. And it was the early 90s. 86, he'd been bombed by America. 88, whether you believe it or not, he conspired to bring down the Lockerbie plane, and then suddenly all changed. Why do you think?
I think there were a variety of factors, but basically Colonel Qaddafi found out that what he'd been trying to do hadn't worked. It was, instead of advancing Libya's interests and advancing his own interests for leadership in the Arab world, in the African world, they were getting farther and farther behind, more and more isolated. I think it's also the case that he grew up. I can tell you that when I met Qaddafi, when he was a young officer and I was a young diplomat and I was the interpreter for our ambassador, at that time, I probably thought that maybe at the end of my diplomatic career, I'd be the Deputy Secretary of State and help achieve Arab-Israeli peace. He thought that Libya was going to be the center for revolutionary change in the Arab world and Africa, and that he personally was going to become a global leader. Well, both of us suffered from delusions.
Well, Ali Tahouni, as you listen to that, as you listen to what the ambassador is saying about Gaddafi's ability to survive, his longevity, and his desire to sort of twist and turn with the winds of change, you realise how difficult it is going to be for him ever to give up power, not just in his own right, but in the line of succession, because he wants his son to take over from him. So what hope for the kind of democracy that you espouse?
Well, I mean, ultimately, I think it's the Libyan people who have to make that choice. My hope, personally, was that because we're calling for a peaceful change, that the Western world, that the United States in particular, walk the walk. And when President Bush talked about bringing democracy to Libya, I was hopeful. Mainly diplomatic pressure. We never called for a military invasion. We're not asking for arms. We don't want to replicate the Iraqi stories in Libya. But basically, we were looking for international pressure from the United Nations, and I think that's the disappointing fact that ultimately, as President Clinton at one time said, it's the economy stupid, and it's the oil mainly.
But yeah, exactly. It must be
Libya.
more than just a little bit disappointing, because your life's dreams are based around the fact that there will eventually be democracy returned to Libya, and with Colonel Gaddafi there at the moment, and now, in a sense, supported by the United States, it's an even more difficult task.
There's no question about it. There's no question about it that he, and that's one of the reasons for the change. You asked the question, why he's changed. Keep in mind that this is, even for the United States, they are going for this short-term maximization. I understand that from the United States. But for Gaddafi also, for him, he's smart enough to know that this legitimacy that the United States give him, that the European gave him, basically increase or enhance his grip on power. So basically that's where the two interests coincide here for Gaddafi and for the United States. And I think in terms of bringing democracy, that actually a setback to democracy. This is, again, the ambassador is there, and he can tell you firsthand that this is not only a failed state, this is not a reliable ally. Everything changed overnight. There are no laws. There are basically no guarantees, even for the oil companies that basically wouldn't necessarily care about the question of democracy. So,
Ambassador, what do you say to that? It's very much a question of sort of, your politics today are my politics tomorrow, if it suits me to steal them.
It's very much like the U.S. situation with China. And just as with China, as Libya becomes increasingly reintegrated into the international community, as it becomes increasingly a part of the global economy, with American companies there providing competition to European companies and others, it's going to find that the norms of the rest of the world are norms that it is in Libya's national interest to adopt. The plain fact is that the U.S. failure to normalize relationships with Tripoli during the past 5 years have not advanced the cause of human rights and democracy in Libya.
But does this leave a bad taste in your mouth? Or is that you just shrug your shoulders and say,
no,
this is life?
This is the way believe me, the issues of human rights and governance will be on the U.S. agenda. It's already been announced that it will be on Secretary Rice's agenda. And this is the way we treat our friends. We raise human rights issues with some of the governments that are very close to us, and the relationships with Libya and the U.S. are going to be much, much better, and we hope normalized, but they're certainly not going to be the intimate kind of relations we have with our very best friends.
David Mack, I'm going to turn for the last word to Ali Tahouni, because members, Dr. Tahouni, of your family still in Libya. When do you think you'll be able to go back there? And what has to change for that?
The change is very simple, and the fact of the matter is I'm not really important. I think just one quick point, when I understand the interest of the United States, but when Mr. Ambassador said that is also in the national interest of Libya, we have to really make a distinction here. It is in the interest of the Gaddafi regime and his family. It's never been in the interest for Libya or the Libyan people. But for me personally, it's a quest for democracy. I'm not really that important, and I will keep advocating that. It happens in my lifetime, that's fine. If it doesn't, it's still a legitimate cause to aspire to.
And do your family back there tell you that life now is any more bearable than it was 25 years ago? There's some improvement, but the bottom line, as I said, this is a failed state, and I hope that one day that you will visit personally and you have that look as the Mr. Ambassador. There are basically no hospital, no roads, the education system is collapsed, the money, there is no accounting for the money, the wealth for the nation. This is a country that doesn't even have one single highway in it. So, the improvement is marginal at best. And you think there's still a possibility that one day Gaddafi will not be in charge, and neither will his son or heirs?
Well, I'm positive of that, either by just the nature of life and the age, but also I'm really I'm always an optimist that that democracy will one day a constitutional democracy like the one that we used to have in the 1950s and 60s, we'll be back to Libya. And that's when Libya become indeed a state that is, that is part of this world community.
Dr. Ali Tahouni, Libyan exile, thank you very much for your time. Mr. Ambassador David Mack, thank you for your thoughts on Libya. And thank you for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. From me, David Foster, and from the rest of the team, bye-bye for now.